guys, welcome to Lecture 4. Today we're going to be talking about classical Greece. Before we start, I just want to go over a couple things. The first is, last class we talked about ancient Greece, and if you guys remember, there are 3 different eras of Greece: ancient, classical, and Hellenistic. So we are moving on from the Spartans and the Athenians, and we are going right over to classical Greece. I actually want to start today's lecture with a video from the video game Assassin's Creed Odyssey. This came out in 2019, I believe, for PS4, Xbox One, and PC. And what's interesting is it is set in a very, very realistic, classical Greek world. We're going to watch a video of someone analyzing some of the different shots, and I hope you guys can see how alive this world was. I know sometimes when we study older history, it's hard to imagine, but the great thing about new technology is that there's more and more ways to be immersed into this world. I hope you guys liked that video. I really loved this game, the Assassin's Creed. I hope that you have a chance to play it someday if you have a PS4, Xbox, or I think it's on PC too. Or at least watch some more gameplay. It is really cool. You get to interact with people that we're going to talk about today, which is just awesome. You get to have a conversation with Pericles, talk to Socrates and stuff like that, and the decisions you make change the course of Greek history, which is so, so cool. But anyways, let's keep on going. Today, like I said, we're talking about culture, and I have a couple different main points. There's also a reading that goes along with these slides to give you guys more information. We've had so much to do this week. This is posting on Thursday, so I don't want to overload you guys with even more information. I want you to kind of sit and think and kind of go at your own pace. So this is our last lecture for this week, and we will be moving on next week to the Hellenistic world and then ancient Rome. Believe it or not, this class is only a couple weeks long, so we really got to get moving. The first person I want to talk about is Pericles. So Pericles was a wealthy man, and he was such a famous person and speaker in Athens that the golden age of Athens is named after him, the age of Pericles. The thing about Pericles is he thought that we needed to invest in education. We needed to have a smart, artistic, intellectual group of people. And another really interesting thing about Pericles is that he made an Athens that the Spartans did not like. If you guys remember last class, we were talking about the differences between Athens and Sparta. Well, Pericles made Athens so powerful that Sparta was not happy. And Pericles created the Delian League, which was an alliance. And the purpose was to fight the Persians. But they end up being so powerful that they fight the Spartans too. Pericles used all of this power to control other city-states. And the significance of Pericles is that the Delian League made Athens super, super wealthy. Greece has so many different resources, but it was controlled by different city-states. Well, now Athenian boats would just go and would take the gold, would take the bronze. And Athens became super rich. He also inspired a lot of people to do art and literature, and he made a center for education. Pericles was really responsible for creating the version of Athens that we saw last class. The next thing I want to talk to you guys about is architecture. There's a couple of things. The first are the columns. There are 3 different columns that the ancient Greeks built: the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian. As you can see, they get more complicated, and the Corinthian is the most artistic, I guess you could say. Not only were these artistically beautiful, but they were so structurally sound that people could make things like this. Any of my Percy Jackson fans here? Does anyone recognize this? This is the Parthenon, or the Acropolis of ancient Greece. So it was built between 447 and 432 BC, and It is a huge, huge building. This was the center of Athenian life. This was where there was voting. This is where there was celebrations. There would be sacrifices. This is where the Athenians got in touch with the gods. And the significance is huge. These columns are what we still see holding up things like the Lincoln Monument in Washington, D.C. And this was the most significant place for religion in ancient Greece and classical Greece and Hellenistic Greece. Next, I want to move on to another piece of visual art, which is sculpture. So the Greeks began making these beautiful sculptures, and it ended up that the Romans replicated this, but the Greeks started it. It was absolutely revolutionary. Nothing had existed like this before. And if you guys remember from our Assassin's Creed video, they were in so many places around the city, and it shows us what the Greeks wanted. The Greeks wanted this golden standard of the human body. A Greek statue is tall, it's huge, it's muscular. What's interesting is this was the Greeks' perfect ideal, and I don't know if you guys know this, but beauty standards are hardly ever achieved. Think about the beauty standard that we have in America. We have a really Eurocentric beauty standard, meaning that we tend to think of the most beautiful people as being skinny, white, having long hair, really femininity if you're a woman. We see the standard for male beauty as being really built, not too built, not skinny, again, usually white, tan. These are all Eurocentric ideas, by the way, and luckily we are dismantling them. But just like with now, the Greeks had this ideal, but not everyone looked this way. Not everyone looked this way in ancient Greece. This is a statue of Poseidon, and I put this one in. It's at a museum to show you guys how huge it is compared to this guy in the background. It's pretty tall. The next thing I want to talk about is literature, specifically Sappho. Unfortunately, in this class, we focus so much on important men that I really wanted to stop and talk to you guys about Sappho. She lived on the island of Lesbos, and she made an academy for unmarried women. Now, the interesting thing about Sappho is that she was most certainly a queer woman. People thought that she was kind of evil. She had this academy for unmarried women, and people think that that was just where her lovers were. She was a poet, and she wrote about loving women, including Aphrodite, which is a Greek god. Sappho was the first kind of famous queer female poet, and her poems are beautiful, but if we skip down to number 4, we're missing a lot of her poetry because Pope Gregory had all of her work burned. So if we look at Sappho's work, it's just like burnt scraps of paper. Papyrus, not paper yet. Another note is just that Sappho is where we get the word sapphic, which means like a queer woman. And obviously the island of Lesbos is where we get the term lesbian, because that was where her academy for unmarried women was. The next thing we're going to talk about is philosophy and our 3 main philosophers of classical Greece, which is Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Before we get started talking about these men, I want to make sure we're familiar with what philosophy means. Philosophy is the study of truth and knowledge. This is an entire major in college. You could take a whole class on these 3 people, the classical Greek philosophers. And of course there are others. But for the purpose of our class, we're just going to talk about these 3 and very briefly. If you've ever been part of a circle in one of your classes or a social justice circle, then you're familiar with Socrates. You just might not know it. Socrates came up with the idea of a Socratic seminar, which is a question and answer way of figuring something out. For example, at Schenectady High School, we want to work out some ideas about social justice, and we do that by asking questions to a group, and our answers help us refine the ideas of social justice. That all came from Socrates way back in classical Greece. In addition to thinking about how to think, Socrates was interested in government and how our society should run. Well, how his society should run. Next, we have Plato. And Plato was interested in justice, but he also wanted to think about what a perfect place would be like. And he wrote a book called The Republic, which he didn't use this word, but it ends up becoming one of the first utopias. So a utopia is a perfect place. If you guys have ever read The Hunger Games or Divergent, you know what a dystopia is, a not perfect place. Well, Plato had his own ideas about a utopia, and he wrote The Republic. Our last one is Aristotle, and Aristotle was a direct student of Plato, and he was mostly interested in scientific things, the scientific side of philosophy. He also was a tutor of Alexander the Great, who we'll talk about next class. Again, there is a reading that goes over a little bit more of their ideas. The last thing that we're going to talk about today is classical Greek medicine, specifically Hippocrates. Hippocrates was the father of medicine, and he created the Hippocratic Oath, which was an oath sworn by doctors to the gods to promise to not harm their patients, to promise to do right by them, and to promise to protect their identity, which is really important. The significance of Hippocrates is that before him, people were doing medicine, people were trying to operate on others. You know, it wasn't a new idea, but Hippocrates begins to collect data from other doctors and he puts it together. So we don't see people just blindly cutting into people anymore. We start to see similar patterns in the beginning of clinical medicine, which is really important to the rest of history, really, and keeping people alive through traumatic events. I hope that I've convinced you guys that classical Greece is important and still significant today. We're going to end our lecture here, and don't forget there's a reading that goes along with these for more information. And this information will be on your next week's test, not the one that is due on today at midnight. That's all for me. Bye.